It's the Progress Pod, a production of the Franklin County Coalition for Progress. I'm Pete Mazzoni with Jeremy Cate. As we are learning, democracies are fragile. The allure of power and the desire to maintain it is a deep-seated part of our human nature. Our history is full of instances where those in power were unabashed in trying to subvert our democracy in order to retain control. Famously, in 1812, Elbridge Gerry signed a bill that redistricted Massachusetts to the benefit of his party. When mapped, one of the contorted districts in the Boston area was said to resemble the shape of a mythological salamander, the gerrymander. We're recording this show Thursday, June 27th, as the Supreme Court hands down its decision on gerrymandering, and we'll be touching on that in the show. But joining us by phone today to discuss how bad the problem is here in Pennsylvania and what we need to do to fix it, we have Lex McMillan of Fair Districts, PA. Thank you for joining us today, Lex.
Well, you're very welcome, Pete. It's a pleasure to do so. I'm glad to be with you and appreciate the opportunity.
That's great. So before we went live here, we were talking about the Supreme Court decision. Give us your take on that.
Well, it's very preliminary because it literally is very coincidental, but it came down today. And so over the last couple hours, I've been reading the decision. It's about a 40-page decision, so I can't say I've read every word with care. And just before this call, I got to a few pages into Justice Kagan's dissent. It was a 5-4 decision. Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, and basically they were dealing with a case that a lot of us involved in this reform effort hoped might provide a foundation for reform and some guidance from the highest court, that it might provide a framework for going forward and needed reform in the issue of gerrymandering and redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, has simply punted. Basically says they were dealing with two extraordinarily flagrant, probably the most flagrant, if you leave aside Pennsylvania, which certainly should be in the running for among the most flagrant political gerrymandering. But the Supreme Court punted and basically said it's a political issue and we really can't get into it. There's no foundation for deciding what's fair. And besides that, the founders really never envisioned that elections would be fair, that there have been unfair elections from the beginning. In fact, gerrymandering even goes back before the example you cited, Elbridge Gerry. It was present even in colonial times, and so it's almost like it's a great American tradition, and the founders were aware of it, and the founders left it to the state legislatures to battle it out, and there's no foundation for a Supreme Court, no matter how outrageous the political gerrymandering is. There's no foundation for us getting involved, so they kind of punted. Or as Justice Kagan wrote. I'll read you just a little bit at the very beginning. She goes, for the first time ever, this court refuses to remedy a constitutional violation because it thinks the task beyond judicial capabilities. And not just any constitutional violation. The partisan gerrymanders in these cases deprive citizens of the most fundamental of their constitutional rights, the rights to participate equally in the political process, to join with others to advance political beliefs, and to choose their political representatives.
Mm-hmm.
They have debased and dishonored our democracy, turning upside down the core American idea that all governmental power derives from the people.
Roberts wrote he acknowledges the following, that excessive partisanship in districting leads to results that reasonably seem unjust. So he goes ahead and admits that it's an issue, but then he follows up with the fact that such gerrymandering is incompatible with democratic principles does not mean that the solution lies with the federal judiciary.
Right. Yeah. So, that's his argument. And of course, they got the votes and that's the way it works. And so it's back to the drawing board in terms of any hopes for looking for a remedy from the Supreme Court. And frankly, Pete, that's not all bad because there is reform going on both in Pennsylvania and beyond. There is a growing public awareness of this problem. A little kind of micro example: I've now worked the polls for the last 3 elections asking voters to sign a petition, just a simple petition saying that they supported the creation of an independent redistricting commission to take gerrymandering off the table and to take it out of the hands of the politicians. And I've gotten wonderful response on this. This most recent one, of course, it was kind of an off election. So I worked at a poll here in Adams County, actually my polling place, because I've met friends and neighbors there. And in the course of about 7 hours, I spent about 5 hours in the morning and a couple hours in the evening intercepting voters and asking them if they knew about gerrymandering, if they'd heard about Fair Districts Pennsylvania, would they be willing to sign my petition supporting the creation of an independent redistricting commission. And I got, in 7 hours, I got 76 signatures. Now, in some ways, that may not sound very many, but you think about the math there. I'm there by myself. Actually, my wife helped me a little bit for the first couple hours, and she had other commitments. But so I'm standing out there for 7 hours. I averaged more than 10 signatures an hour.
Yeah, that's good.
Of course, that takes some conversation. You have conversations with people, but I would say I had maybe 90 conversations at the most. I didn't actually keep a good count, but certainly 90% of the people I talked to were more than eager to sign the petition. And it usually didn't take a lot of conversation. It'd be like, "Hi, have you got just a minute? I'd like to ask you if I'd like to tell you how to make sure that your vote counts." And that would kind of intrigue people. And they go, "What are you talking about?" And I'd say, "Well, have you heard of Fair District Pennsylvania?" Not so many people heard about that. And I would say, "Have you heard of gerrymandering? You familiar with the idea of gerrymandering?" "Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Pennsylvania's really bad on that, isn't it?" I go, "Yeah, it really is." And I would explain to them who I was and what I was doing and ask them if they would sign the petition. They go, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let me sign that petition." Some people didn't even require that much explanation. They'd go like, "Is this about gerrymandering?" I go, "Yeah, actually it is. So I'll sign your petition," Well,
that's great.
So there's a growing public awareness. There's a growing political awareness. We have great momentum since we started Fair Districts Pennsylvania back in 2016. I should say also that Fair Districts Pennsylvania is a nonpartisan citizens group established in early 2016 to support reform, particularly focused on the issue of gerrymandering, and we've made great progress. We certainly have opposition, but we have some 65,000 signatures on this petition I was describing now. We've got some 45,000 people on our email list. We have a variety of polls we've done and interviews we've done and studies have been done. We've got anywhere between 64 and 69% of the surveyed Pennsylvania citizens support redistricting reform. 69% in a recent study, 69% said they wanted an independent commission. We've now had 316 different governing bodies in Pennsylvania. There's a huge number. I think it's 2,500 or something. But 316 governing bodies across Pennsylvania have declared support for redistricting reform. That includes 20 county commissioners, so that's 20 county commissions, so that's about a third, almost a third of the county commissions.
Mm-hmm.
But all those governmental entities that have signed on to the FDPA reform efforts represent 8.8 million citizens, or approximately 68% of the population of Pennsylvania. So I find that a very encouraging stat. We now, as you probably know, Pete, have two pieces of legislation in the House. There's one in the Senate as well, but it'll muddy the water. I'll just talk about the two House bills. There's House Bill 22 and House Bill 23, both of which are designed to work together to create this independent commission. It's a little complicated, and if you want to read more about it, or your listeners want to read more about it, they can find great detail on the FDPA website that goes into detail on it. But suffice it to say, it's a complex, time-sensitive strategy. The good news is that House Bill 22 has 83 co-sponsors, has more co-sponsors than any other piece of legislation in the House right now. There are 66 Democrats and 17 Republicans. And House Bill 23 has 91 co-sponsors, 75 Dems, and 16 Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm encouraged by the progress we're making. There is certainly resistance, but we are making progress. And nationwide, there's progress. In the most recent election, November 2018, Michigan, Colorado, Utah, Missouri all had ballot items where referenda, I think they were, where the public approved the creation of independent redistricting commissions, all slightly varied, but based on our model. And Arkansas and Oklahoma have similar legislation on their docket coming up in the election of 2020. So they've joined the half dozen other states that already have put these redistricting commissions in place. It's interesting to note also that one of the early proponents of the very kind of reform that we are advocating here in Pennsylvania was Ronald Reagan. And he is, as you saw in the PowerPoint I shared with you, he was outspoken in his indignity and outrage that gerrymandering was undermining the integrity of our elections. Now, Reagan, of course, was concerned that in California at the time,
it was Democrats doing it,
favoring Democrats, just as is happening outrageously and unashamedly in Maryland currently. And Maryland, of course, was one of the cases in which the Supreme Court. The unblushing kind of audacity of it. Steny Moyer was one of the proponents. He called himself, "I'm a serial gerrymanderer." I mean, there's no attempt to hide it. There's no attempt to, it's kind of like it's spoil systems. Hey, to the winner goes the spoils.
Right.
So you can, in Pennsylvania, for example, following the 2010 census and 2011 redistricting, the gerrymandering was so outrageous that even though Democratic candidates got between 49 and 51% of the votes in the subsequent congressional elections, the congressional delegation was 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats. Yet, I mean, as you know, Pennsylvania is a fairly evenly divided state in terms of Republicans and Democrats, which is why there's a great deal of national interest in Pennsylvania and why there have been these outside PACs that have come in and put huge amount of money. And, of course, there's no restriction on PAC money in Pennsylvania. Our elected officials can take as much dark money as they want and not report it. Pennsylvania's been a targeted state to swing it to help in this case, the Republican initiative to dominate the House. Now, of course, that swung back the other way with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision last year that declared the 2011 redistricting unconstitutional. It was so jerry-rigged, so gerrymandered, that even though Pennsylvania is roughly 50-50 Republican Democrats, we wound up, of our 18 congressional seats, we wound up with 13 of them Republican, 5 Democrats. Okay?
Yeah. Not representative.
Ultimately, slow process. The League of Women Voters brought suit and ultimately triumphed in the state court. And the state Supreme Court, Pennsylvania Supreme Court, went to the state legislature and said, go back and redraw fair district lines. And the Republicans who were controlling the legislature said, oh, well, we don't have time to do it. You're not giving us enough time. And I'm sorry, it was two-step process. First, they came back with a revised map, and the Supreme Court goes, this is hardly any better than what we originally ruled against. Go back to the drawing board. And then the Republicans go, oh, well, there's no time. Now we're out of time. In other words, they used a big chunk of time drawing a map that was just as partisan as one before. Then when the Supreme Court rejected it, and this is all really hardball naked politics. There's nothing naive about any of this.
Right.
And so the Supreme Court comes back and goes, okay, fine, and we'll draw it ourselves. You don't have time, we'll draw it. Because the fact is, with sophisticated mapping technology now today, you've got high school kids sitting down drawing redistricting lines. I mean, it can be done in a matter of hours. If you want to do it fairly, if you want to really manipulate it and use sophisticated mapping technology and demographic technology that should be irrelevant in drawing the lines, then it does take a long time. It's much more complicated. So anyway, bottom line is Pennsylvania Supreme Court hired a map maker and said, okay, here's the way it's going to be, to the howls of protest. I mean, the outraged indignity has been a little comical because here are these guys who are dealing with the most unabashed partisanship, cynical political manipulation, and then when they lose a round, and admittedly, arguably, a partisan Supreme Court decision, because now the Supreme Court has majority Democrats on it, you would think they were all virgins who had been raped by barbarians. It's just like, oh my!
Wow, you really go for it with the analogies.
Oh my! It was just. I mean, I had to laugh. I mean, I talked to our local state representative. He was just howling in protest. I said, "Hey, well, Dan, if you guys had done your job, the state Supreme Court never would have done anything. Oh, there was never any time to do it. They didn't give us time. Oh, come on, Dan, give me a break."
Okay.
So anyway, so that's where it stands. And the problem with it, 2 problems with it. One, it's no way to run a railroad. You do not want the Supreme Court of a state drawing your district lines. It should be done under the oversight of your elected officials. It is inherently a political process. It should not be in the state Supreme Court. And the best way to make sure that it never again goes to the Supreme Court would be to pass the legislation that we currently have in the State House to reform the process and create an independent citizens redistricting commission that would be responsible to the public, to be impartial, be transparent, and be accountable.
And then your other bill, HB 22, will amend the Pennsylvania Constitution.
That's correct. Yeah. HB 22, again, I don't know how much detail this, I have a hard time keeping up with it, right? It's so complicated, but we have two different ways in Pennsylvania of drawing electoral districts. You've got one process for the congressional districts, and that's done by a 5-person committee that represents the two leaders in the majority party, the two leaders in the minority party, and then a chair that they are supposed to select. Well, because it's an inherently political process, they're never able to select a chair.
Right.
So guess who selects the chair? You probably know, right? The Supreme Court selects the chair.
Gets kicked up.
As long as the Supreme Court is controlled by Republicans, the Republicans are in control. But this time around, when we come up on 2020 census, and if we don't change anything, if the status quo remains, then you're going to come up with the same situation, and the Supreme Court will pick a Democrat to be the chair of that. It'll be a 3-2 decision on the redistricting for congressional districts. So that'll be again.
So inaction on the part of Republicans will end up hurting them.
It would certainly appear that way currently in Pennsylvania, and that message does not seem to be getting through, which is really odd because you got two things that would be quite different in 2020 from 2010, and that is in 2010 the Republicans control the House, the Senate, the governorship, and the Supreme Court. Now they do still control the House and Senate, but they don't have the governorship and they don't have the Supreme Court. And so the governor will play a key role in overseeing the legislation that will be passed to create new state House and Senate districts, which is done by pure legislative process and is just a simple law. But the governor has a right of veto.
Good.
And on the congressional side, you've got a state Supreme Court that is now majority Republican, majority Democrat, that would appoint the chair of the dark chamber where they do the congressional redistricting.
So the time for action is now.
Absolutely. And this, again, is the second problem. Not only did the Supreme Court intervening really annoy the Republicans in Harrisburg. I mean, the fury is hard to exaggerate. Really annoyed, like little boys who got their hands caught in the cookie jar and got slapped hard, and they are really unhappy about getting caught out. And
well, they stand to lose their jobs.
Well, yeah. Well, the other is that it's given the false impression, and maybe this is the best takeaway from this conversation, the false impression that gerrymandering got solved. That the Supreme Court, because I said, hey, didn't the Supreme Court solve that problem? I go, no. A one-time fix, a Band-Aid that is only good to 2020. When we do the 2020 census, then all bets are off. We're back to redistricting. Then, and the current process is still in place. And without reform, it'll be the same game all over again, with a slightly better picture of it not being a completely unfettered partisan process because of the Supreme Court and the governorship not being held by Republicans.
Now, earlier you were talking about how sophisticated their techniques are. Let's talk about some of the techniques used, because on your website you do detail how this is done. So tell us about how that works.
Yeah, well, there are two key terms. One's called cracking and one's called packing. Okay, it's a little hard. This is one that really does give itself to visuals. So just talking about it, but cracking is basically taking some core group of voters who have something in common. And let's just say it's a group of Republicans. And instead of allowing them to be in kind of a contiguous district where they might have some political power, a great example of this was the former Congressional District 7 up near Berks County, where I lived for 12 years, is where I became very aware and involved about this. And you take them and you crack them. In other words, you draw the line in such a way that you diminish their political clout by scattering them among several other districts that have a majority of the other party. The other one is called packing, and that is to take a bunch of folks of a common party or political interest, and instead of letting them have a significant electoral impact on 2 or 3 districts, you'll pack them all together in one district. Well, yeah, it'll become a slam dunk for that district, but the other 2 or 3 districts that are adjacent to it become slam dunks for the other party.
Let me just pause for a second here, and for anyone listening who needs the visual, and I do agree it's a visual, you can go to fairdistrictspa.com to see what he's talking about. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, lots of good pictures. And in fact, if you want my favorite, partly because I lived there and became very aware of the situation while I was there, living up in the Reading area. If you go to the Fair District's webpage, you'll find the example, sort of the poster child of gerrymandering at its worst, and it's Pennsylvania's old district, Congressional District 7. And if you look at that, they just show you a series of pictures, just little outline pictures, from back in the 1950s all the way down to 2018, when the Supreme Court intervened. And you'll see District 7, which is partially in Berks County, but not entirely in Berks County. Back in the 1950s, it looked like roughly kind of like a loaf of bread, sort of canted up on its side. And then it started to transmogrify, almost as if it was some kind of a horror film. And all of a sudden, it's like taking shape, and all of a sudden, it's emerging and growing arms and legs and tentacles and outreach. At the end of it, the most recent one, before the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, it's a district that stretches across 4 different counties, maybe 5, stretches from down in Lancaster, divides Berks County up in such a way that Berks, with other adjacent congressional districts, Berks County alone is in different parts of it in 4 different congressional districts. And Montgomery County, adjacent, which is kind of a mirror image of what they're doing in Berks County, has 5 different congressional districts. And in Berks County and in Montgomery County, not a single one of the federal congressional representatives lives in that county.
Wow.
Got that? Okay, so Berks County, well, not a very big county, mostly an agricultural county with a big industrial base in the middle.
Right.
With one of the poorest cities, the 5th largest city in Pennsylvania, and one of the poorest cities in the country, has virtually no real congressional representation. You've got somebody down in Lancaster County who has a little piece of it. You've got somebody up in Lehigh Valley who has a little piece of it. Mm-hmm. You've got somebody down in Chester County who's got a little piece of it. You got another guy way over out in the outer reaches in Montgomery County has a piece of it. None of them live in Berks County. And interestingly, none of the congressional representatives in Montgomery County live in Montgomery County.
This goes to a fundamental fairness that I think we need in our elections. And when you talk to people, I mean, is this issue just not sexy enough to really, get momentum behind it? Or do you feel there is momentum behind it?
Yeah, I think there's momentum. I think that's a tough question, Pete. It's a great question. It is the key question, because, if you're walking down the street and you see some guy with a knife chasing somebody, the likelihood of you just kind of turning away and not paying it, of doing nothing, I think most Americans, most people, most human beings would do something. They might not go and attack the guy with the knife, because that might be a little scary, but they would do something. They might scream, they might shout, they might call 911, they might run into they would do something. They would see something really flagrantly bad and do something. In my mind, gerrymandering is a direct, lethal assault on the core principles of our. And when I talk with people about this, they go, "Oh, you're right. It is. It's awful." And so it's like, well, why isn't there more outrage? Why isn't there more concern about it? And that I don't really have the answer. I mean, I think part of it is gerrymandering itself, and a lot of people feeling kind of a sense of hopelessness and helplessness that it's the way things work. You're not going to be able to change it. It's sort of, this is Pennsylvania we're talking about after all, and the culture of political corruption that is reflected in Pennsylvania is cynically, deeply accepted. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a guy someplace a few weeks ago. I forget what it was, but it was actually at the polls. He was saying that he had recently moved to Pennsylvania, like 5 or 6 years before, and he was voting. And he said he'd grown up in New York, and he lived in upstate New York. He said he'd always thought that New York was a really politically corrupt environment. He said, but that's before I moved to Pennsylvania. Yeah. And these people put New York to shame. They have no shame.
Yeah.
So there's a culture of political corruption in Pennsylvania that is very, very deep, And I think it creates a kind of cynicism and indifference.
Yeah, I think that's what happens. People just get callous about it. Like you're saying, they say that that's just the way things are. I think the other thing that happens, though, is indifference to this issue is short-sighted, because if you're a Republican right now in the state and you're enjoying the benefits of gerrymandering, that can change.
Yeah.
And so I just go ahead.
It definitely can, and it almost certainly will, and that sort of mystifies me.
Yeah.
Although I will say that there does appear to be nothing dramatic, but some indicators that there are some key Republicans in the leadership who are beginning to think, whoa, maybe we ought to be paying a little more attention to this. Where in the last time around, the last session of the state legislature, the leadership, the House leadership was ranged between hostile to indifferent to the proposed legislation, and simply illustrated the great power of the way the rules are written. And this is something we're working on also in fair districts. The rules in the House and Senate are such that I don't care how many co-sponsors you have. I don't care how popular a piece of legislation might be, how much support there. If the chair of the relevant committee doesn't want to get out of committee, it'll never see the light of day.
Right.
He's a virtual autocrat and controls the process entirely. And this is a matter of the rules that are adopted without conversation or debate at the beginning of every session. And so there needs to be rules reform. And there are folks in the House and the Senate who know there needs to be rules reform. And so we can be hopeful on that.
So looking to the future, how do you see the efforts of Fair Districts PA playing out in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, there are two levels. I mean, a friend of mine used to say, well, dream in Technicolor. Okay, so if I dream in Technicolor, I would say that we'll get this legislation passed, and we will see the creation of an independent citizens redistricting commission that will do for Pennsylvania what's happening in other states, what happened first in California, and that is to reduce, not eliminate. It is an inherently political process.
Right.
If you get a commission of citizens who are properly selected and who are not involved in politics, not political people themselves, not elected officials, not members of politician staff, we can have a process that will significantly reduce the partisanship and I think result in a fairer set of district lines and a more representative process in our elections. Okay, so that's dreaming in Technicolor, and I'll tell you, I'm an optimist, or I wouldn't be involved in this.
Right, it's a big fight.
But it is a tall hill. It is a really tall hill. So what is happening, though, and what certainly will happen, and is very encouraging, is that the work of Fair District Pennsylvania, just like the conversation you and I are having right now, this is one of hundreds of conversations that are happening in various formats and various fora all over the Commonwealth. Hundreds of them. I think they've tracked some 750 different kinds of public conversations occurring around this. There's a growing awareness. It's not going to be in 2011 when the Republicans did the line drawing in Pennsylvania. They were able to do it without folks paying much attention. I mean, people just weren't tuned in. It was long before Fair Districts PA was even in existence. I mean, you had some folks like the League of Women Voters who were paying attention, but there wasn't anything like the organized awareness and reform initiative that there is today. So no matter how this comes out on the legislative side, it will not be possible for the Republicans, who in this case are in control of the process, to be quite so cynical and outrageous in the gerrymandering. They will certainly try gerrymandering. And heck, as the United States Supreme Court apparently wrote in this decision that came down today, it's sort of like, oh, well, gerrymandering is a part of the American political tradition. Of course, politicians are going to look out for their own interests when they're drawing the district lines.
It's a very cynical take on our electoral system.
Well, I'm just kind of saying the only question is how much is how much, and we're not qualified to say how much is how much. Mm-hmm. So, okay, fine. They do say unless race is involved, if it's a racial matter, then they could intervene.
They could have intervened.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question. But they wanted...
especially... Well, and there's just all kind of data out there. There's all kind of guidance out there.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't finished reading Justice Kagan's dissent, but I imagine Justice Kagan will go over that in great detail on what kind of relief exists and would be available.
Well, Lex, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing out there. I think if you're a Republican or a Democrat, this is really kind of about an ethical situation that people's votes should count and they should be represented fairly. So thank you for your work. I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy now, and he's going to announce where you'll be and what's going on.
Lex, speaking of conversations around the state, we're looking forward to having you here in Chambersburg on Monday, July 8th, correct?
That's what's on my calendar.
Okay, we will see you at the Coyle Free Library, and the community can show up and ask you questions in person and hear your presentation in person. So we're looking forward to that. Again, that's at the Coyle Free Library at 6:30 on July 8th. So.
Well, thanks for the plug for that. I hope we'll have a nice turnout. And whoever comes, everyone counts. It'll be a great conversation, even if it's a small one. We'll be happy with the turnout.
All right. Thanks again, Lex.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Look forward to it.